Judy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I just sent you, you probably marked it up. I just picked up a few minutes ago your suggested edits, and I liked it a lot. I just had some typos and a couple of words that were missing that I threw in, and I sent them your way in case you hadn't had a chance to proof it or whatever.
Okay. No, this is good.
So none of them, if any of them are not good for you, I'm not tied to them. I'm just throwing those out as maybe improvements.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We all here? Let's see, I guess we could find that out by taking a roll, right?
That's a good start.
I think we should resume. We're gonna resume our meeting. We've been in recess. This is still the July 21st, 2020 meeting of the Public Regulation Commission. It's 4:15 and we're getting back on the record. And where we left off was we were going to take a break so that General Counsel could further work on the order before us today in the case 19-0018 UT in the matter of Public Service Company of New Mexico's abandonment of San Juan Generating Station Unit 1 and 3. So, Ms. Namer, can you bring us up to speed with where we are now?
Yes. Just in housekeeping matters, previously you stated that we were adjourned, but we were just taking a recess.
Yes, yeah.
So we did not, just for the record, we did not adjourn. We took a recess.
Correct.
And now we're coming back after the recess.
Yeah, if I said adjourn, I misspoke. I meant recess.
Yes, and the only matters that were discussed were the ones, case number 19-0018, in the matter of Public Service Company of New Mexico's abandonment of San Juan Generating Station Units 1 and 4, P&M's emergency motion for stay of rate credits, as well as the companion appeal, SC 39440. That being said, this matter comes before the Commission today upon the filing of a June 29th, 2022 emergency motion and supporting brief for stay of rate credits under final order pending appeal and for shortened time response. That was filed by P&M in this case. And by way of background, the Commission on June 29th, same day, issued a final order adopting the recommended decision requiring P&M to implement rate credits. On the same date, P&M filed its emergency motion for stay and shortened time response with the Commission. On June 30th, the Commission denied P&M's request for shortened response time from the New Mexico Public Regulation Rule of Procedure 13-day response time for motions, and ordered responses due no later than 13 days from June 29th, 2022. Also on June 30th, 2022, P&M filed with the New Mexico Supreme Court in dockets SC 39440, a similar emergency motion to stay of the final order adopting the recommended decision. Also on June 30th, 2022, P&M filed a notice of appeal of the final order adopting the recommended decision in docket SC 39440. In the pleadings, PNM requested the commission issue an immediate emergency stay of those portions of the June 29th, 2022 final order requiring PNM to implement rate credits in order to avoid permanent irreparable harm to PNM in the form of lost revenues that will likely exceed 128.3 million, which PNM compares to PNM's total net earnings for 2021 of 155.5 million. PNM asserted in its pleadings that the rate credit will lower net earnings by 73.9 million net of tax, which represents a 48% reduction based on 2021 earnings. And this reduction in PNM's revenues will preclude PNM from the opportunity to earn its authorized return on equity, also known as ROE, by more than half of its allowed return authorized by the commission. In addition, PNM asserted that its credit metrics will be adversely impacted. The commission received responses from numerous parties on July 12th, 2022. Those parties include NMAREA, NEE. There was a joint response from CCAE, Prosperity Works, Sierra Club, and Utility Division staff, as well as a response from WRA. The proposed order states that it would deny PNM's emergency motion for stay of rate credits. And in addition, it would strike certain portions of Mr. Monroyd's affidavit, which was attached to the emergency motion to stay. The reason for denying the motion to stay is that the commission has previously ruled that in order to be granted a stay, PNM must satisfy all four factors in a case entitled Tenneco Oil Company versus New Mexico Water Quality Control Commission, a 1986 decision 105 NM 708. The four factors are: 1, a likelihood that the applicant will prevail on the merits; 2, a showing of irreparable harm to the applicant unless the stay is granted; 3, evidence that no substantial harm will result to other interested persons; and 4, a showing that no harm will ensue to the public interest. The commission finds in the proposed order that PNM's emergency motion for stay does not fulfill any of the four factors as follows. First off, PNM is not likely to prevail on the merits of its appeal. This factor is clear. Contrary to PNM's arguments, the Energy Transition Act, also known as the EPA, does not permit PNM to issue bonds at any time PNM chooses, no matter how long after abandonment. Further, contrary to what PNM alleges, a rate credit does not violate established principles of rate making. All of the arguments that PNM raises in its motion to stay, such as these two arguments, were previously raised before the commission, disputed by all the parties, and rejected by the commission in the final order. PNM continues to argue that the rate credits are precluded by the financing order and by the ETA. However, that section does not, the section it quotes, PNM quotes, does not apply to limit the commission's authority until after the bonds have been issued, which has not yet occurred. Further, contrary to PNM's argument, the commission has the authority to ensure that rates are fair, just, and reasonable under all actions under the PUA. In conclusion, as the commission stated when it adopted the RD in its entirety, P&M is not likely to prevail on the merits of the appeal because the ETA, the financing order, and P&M's own representations all support the conclusion that P&M's rates were to be reduced upon abandonment, which is when the bonds were to be issued, the rate credits provided, and San Juan costs locked in for future recovery. Regarding the second factor, P&M has also not shown that it will be irreparably harmed without a stay pending an appeal. P&M asserts in its page 12 of its motion for stay, as well as in the affidavit of Mr. Monroy, that it will suffer 128.3 million or 48% of its after-tax earnings if the rate credits are not stayed. But P&M is contradicted by the facts. Rather than losing 48%, it will receive a windfall if the rate credit is stayed and not provided. The amount of the rate credit was derived from P&M's own calculations and is exactly representative of the costs that P&M will no longer incur when the San Juan generators are abandoned. In other words, the amount of the rate credit is exactly offset by the reduction in P&M's cost of service upon abandonment. For this reason, P&M will not lose any money. And by providing the rate credits, P&M will only be prevented from receiving extra earnings by in other words, it would be receiving extra earnings on San Juan Generating Station when it's closed. As WRA pointed out in their response, WRA's expert, Dr. Larry Blank, testified to the fact that the revenue requirement associated with San Juan Generating Station, 98 million per year, includes P&M's rate of return on the remaining capital investment, depreciation, operation, and maintenance, taxes, and other amounts. However, when San Juan closes, which Unit 1 did close on July 1, and stops operating and is out of service, and the total amount of the 98 million per year will be part of P&M's return on investment because there are no more expenses. The commission finds that issuing rate credits and preventing P&M shareholders from enjoying a windfall is not causing irreparable harm to P&M. Moreover, even if P&M incurred any harm, such harm would be quickly repairable because P&M has an adequate remedy at law to be compensated for its approximately 283 million in stranded investment at San Juan. All it has to do is issue the bonds. It's undisputed that P&M supported passage of the ETA and defended the commission's financing order on appeal. Contrary to P&M's claim at pages 10 through 15 of its motion that it will be irreparably harmed by imposition of the rate credit is another assertion that P&M has invested over $1 billion to serve customers and has not filed a rate case to recoup those costs. But P&M may file a rate case and adjust the rates. And facts are P&M have earned a healthy return on equity exceeding 9%. Lastly, any statement by P&M that it plans to invest $0.9 billion in 2022-23 does not amount to evidence that it will be irreparably financially harmed because these forecasted capital expenditures are only expenditures that P&M may spend but have not yet been incurred. Regarding the third factor, it is clear that substantial harm will be suffered by P&M's customers as a result of the requested stay. As the RD stated, and it was adopted in the final order, P&M's change in plans to delay issuing the bonds until 15 to 18 months after abandonment results in P&M's continuing to charge customers the costs of owning and operating San Juan after it closes, as well as at the same time charge customers for replacement power needed because San Juan has closed, and then to later charge customers again for San Juan costs preserved for recovery by the ETA, and to divert its shareholders' cost savings, intended for customers. Clearly, this result is contrary to the public interest and contrary to the intent of the ETA, and unless remedied, will not result in rates that are fair, just, and reasonable. WRA in its response points to Dr. Larry Blank's testimony, which was the company's, and I'm quoting, the company's new scheme to delay the issuance is obviously and purposely designed to enrich shareholders while depriving customers of the benefits of the ETA to which they are entitled. As Dr. Blank further testified, P&M's strategy should not be rewarded, and unless customers receive the benefit of that reduced revenue requirement, P&M's rates would not be reasonable. For this reason, the Commission finds that P&M's customers will suffer substantial harm if P&M's requested stay were granted, because P&M would be able to collect replacement power costs that are incurred by the closure of San Juan and deprive the customers of the corresponding cost reductions associated with the closure. Fourth, P&M's requested stay will harm the public interest. I referred to in the final order adopting the recommended decision protects the customers from the moral hazard created by P&M's change in plans to issue the bonds upon abandonment. P&M argues the moral hazard is irrelevant, but this cannot be true where the PRC is authorized to regulate P&M to ensure the public interest and to ensure fair, just, and reasonable rates. As the RD found, adopted by the final order, P&M purposely withheld information about its intention to enrich its shareholders by delaying the bond issuance at the expense and to the detriment of its customers. The Commission concurs with WRA's response that, quote, the recommended decision appropriately recognizes P&M's secretive plan to unjustifiably profit from its self-serving and unlawful scheme and fashions an appropriate rate remedy to overcome what would otherwise be irreversible harm to the customers and the public interest. The public interest would be harmed if P&M's requested stay was granted. So for these reasons, the Commission should deny P&M's motion to stay. P&M should implement the rate credits for bills issued in August 2022. Regarding the affirmation of Henry Monroy attached to the motion to stay. In that affirmation, Mr. Monroy testifies to certain alleged facts that it purports are currently in the record. However, some of these, quote, facts are not in the record or are merely interpolations. All of the other parties in this case were denied the right of due process to cross-examine P&M on these purported facts and were denied the right of due process to present their own witnesses on these facts. In particular, the order references the affirmation of Mr. Gorman, the witness of NM area, and attaches it and incorporates it by reference as because it contains a line-by-line disputation of Mr. Monroy's affirmation. So for this reason, the proposed order would strike certain portions, not all of Mr. Monroy's affidavit, just the parts that were not previously in the record. And at this point, P&M is improperly attempting to supplement the record, which should be prohibited. The commission and none of the other parties have no way of knowing if these previously untestified to statements are true or not. They were not vetted by staff or other parties. Finally, the order addresses the assertion by P&M that the customers will not be harmed because P&M promises that it will record a regulatory liability for the amount of the rate credits during the stay period, which will ensure that customers will be made whole. Mr. Monroy's affirmation states, and I quote, P&M is cognizant of the desire to preserve the benefits of the rate credits for customers in the event P&M's appeal is unsuccessful. In order to ensure that customers are made whole in the event that P&M's appeal is not successful, P&M will establish a regulatory liability for the benefits of the rate credits subject to the period during the stay with a carrying charge calculated on the amount of the rate credits subject to the stay. I just want to stop for a second at that sentence. They're not recording it, they're just establishing it. Then P&M states P&M will record the regulatory liability if it receives a final determination from the New Mexico Supreme Court affirming the commission's decision. Those accumulated regulatory liability amounts plus carrying charge will be reconciled in P&M's following rate case. Again, I'd like to stop here and state that case has not been filed yet. P&M says that they'll file it at the end of this year. Usually that takes about 12 months to finish. So we're talking at least 16 months away. I'm going back to the affidavit. Mr. Monroy states, pursuant to the terms of the financing order as reflected on page 99 of the recommended decision, the carrying charge will be calculated based on P&M's cost of debt. The regulatory liability will ensure that customers are made whole in the event that P&M's appeal is rejected. In the order, the commission finds that P&M's so-called promise approximately 16 months from now to record a regulatory liability is an inadequate remedy to remedy the immediate harm that customers now face and to remedy P&M's current double recovery. Right now, not 16 months from now, the customers are being charged in rates all of the costs of San Juan Unit 1 and on September 1st of Unit 4 without receiving any of the benefits of the ETA of promised customer savings because P&M refuses to issue the bonds now. Right now, P&M is double collecting the costs of San Juan, even though it is abandoned and not operating. The RD and the final orders ruling for P&M to issue an immediate rate credit is the only remedy that will prevent such immediate certain harm to the customers. P&M's past history in this case, where it represented to all parties in the hearing examiner that it would issue the bonds at about the same time as abandonment, which the commission relied upon to its detriment, was not true because then P&M unilaterally changed its mind and decided not to issue the bonds until after completion of a rate case, which is 15 to 18 months. Furthermore, even if P&M records a regulatory liability, if it loses the appeal of the final order, those amounts may never be credited to customers in a rate case where there may be a stipulation entered into, and that liability may be negotiated out, or where the regulatory liability amounts may be diluted in the rate making process when considered with all other of P&M's cost of service. Further, PNM's regulatory liability remedy is inadequate because it views customers as a whole class, not as individuals. In reality, individual customers who would now receive a rate credit may not be the same individual customers that would receive a possible future credit. Also, in reality, the individual ratepayers who would not receive a rate credit now actually need it due to high inflation and post-pandemic hardship. PNM is certainly in a better economic position to absorb any economic harm than lower moderate income ratepayers. And the order refers to the joint response of CCAE, Sierra Club, Prosperity Works, and Utility Division staff to support the proposition of harm to low and moderate income ratepayers. The rate credit remedy, not the regulatory liability, is the only certain remedy to prevent harm to current ratepayers that are double paying for San Juan units costs that are no longer in service. And for these reasons, the proposed order denies PNM's motion to stay, strikes certain portions of Mr. Monroy's affirmation, and I stand for questions.
Commissioners, does anyone have any questions for Ms. Amer? Yes, Commissioner Fishman.
Madam Chair, just a comment. I just wanted to thank Ms. Amer and General Counsel for being so responsive to the concerns that were raised in executive session today. And I think you've captured it all really well. So thank you.
Anybody
Madam
else?
Chair?
Yes, Commissioner
Yeah,
Fishman.
Judy, on the order, paragraph 19 mentions September 1st of 2022 of Unit 4.
Yes.
Should that be October 1st? I thought Unit 4
No,
was
I think you're correct. That's an error.
Which paragraph is that?
paragraph 19 in the order.
Yes, you are correct, Commissioner. That should be October 1st.
Okay.
Good.
And I just have a few other minor typos, but I could just send those to Judy.
Yes.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
And, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I sent a couple typo notes over to Judy as well. They don't change the content or meaning at all. They're just
Yeah, I appreciate that.
clean up. So anybody else who wants to, if they see some typos, feel free. I think they should feel free to submit them to Judy. She'll know what to do with it.
I sent her some earlier, but in looking at the second version, they didn't get captured. So I don't know if she's had a chance to do typos yet, but.
Yeah.
No, I was planning on actually doing that after this meeting, before we serve it.
Great. That's good. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just one more question, I guess, about Monroy's affidavit. I understand the need to strike information that wasn't a part of the record, but in terms of what remains procedurally, does that still need to be reviewed and responded to by interveners, or is it procedurally correct, since what's left in the corrected affidavit, if it correctly reflects a record, then it's not subject to review and response?
Commissioner Maestas, members of the commission, all the parties had the opportunity to respond to the Monroy affidavit. And as I stated, NM area witness, Mr. Gorman, filed an affirmation contradicting and explaining the error in some of the statements that Mr. Monroy stated. So the parties have had the chance to respond to the affidavit, and as corrected, with the deletions of portions that were not in the record, I believe that the parties have had the opportunity to respond.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Byrd or Commissioner Vicente Aguilar, do you have any comments?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
thank you very much. I concur with the changes that occurred on the order from this morning. I think it's important to protect the ratepayers. Why is it that PNM is making the rate credits or the rate increases so complicated for their customers? I don't think we should be able to go through this process. And I think it's very important for the commissioners to regulate the utility company, in this particular case, PNM. And we have often seen utility companies not agreeing with how the commissioners set the orders. They quickly file an appeal at the Supreme Court. So my statement angles in a way that the customers can understand. Specifically, people that are going to be reading about this the next day or two. We're simply asking PNM to give the rate credits and to move away from, since the abandonment process has been completed, and they're very slow in moving in that direction. And but 3 years ago, my recollection is that PNM was moving forward, fast forward on renewable energy and announcing to the public that they're one of the companies that, that is prepared and convinced the state legislature. But the real practice today is that they're challenging our regulatory decisions. And those are my statements, Chairwoman Hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Vicente Aguilar. Let's see, Commissioner Byrd, I see you're unmuted. You want to say?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the order as presented by Judy.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Thank you both. All right. We've got a motion and a second. Do we have any more discussion?
I'm not going to restate what I said when we passed the final order. But what I can say is that the public interest would definitely be harmed if PNM's requested stay was granted. And I want to echo what Commissioner Fishman said when we approved the final order. I really want to thank WRA and the other interveners that weighed in on this issue. The only single word I can characterize PNM's arguments, I can only say that they're just preposterous, and there's just no way we can believe PNM when it intends to make a promise. And so I think this is about protecting the interest of PNM customers. And I feel like I've never felt so clear about a decision as this one. And so I just want to, again, thank WRA and all the interveners and you, Commissioner Fishman, for really enhancing this order as well. I feel very, very confident in our position, and I feel confident that the Supreme Court will deny P&M's request to stay our order. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Commissioner Byrd, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
I agree with my fellow commissioners, and the sad part is we expected P&M to do exactly what they're doing. And it's just disappointing, but I guess we knew what we were getting into, and we wish they would have the same interest at heart that we do, and that's doing it openly in the best interest of everybody involved, not just one side. Anyway, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Byrd. I appreciate it. Well, for my part, I also want to concur with the comments that have been made. When the ETA was passed, it was a very hopeful time, and it's been very disappointing to see how the good parts of it are becoming, I feel, abused in the way they're being misinterpreted. And I'm just glad we have such a strong staff, strong ODC, and particularly alert, thinking, and proactive fellow commissioners so that we can all work together to try to retrieve the good from what was intended by that act, in staying on top of these twists and turns as we try to achieve the objectives of the ETA and closing coal plants and protecting the communities in New Mexico that deserve protection. And today, I think with this order, we're standing firm. I think it's the right thing to do. And notwithstanding all the, I just want to say, the great disappointment. I'll put it that way. Really, it just borders on disgust after a while when you see so many efforts to undermine it. But in any case, great disappointment. I'm glad to come out at this point with this order. So I really appreciate everybody's participation. And I see Commissioner Fishman.
Yeah.
Something to say.
I was going to wait till after the vote, but a couple of quick comments. And I see Joe also wants to, Commissioner Mastis also wants to comment. I just want to point out that the 128 million that customers are being scammed out of under the P&M's proposal is a drop in the bucket compared to what the cost to customers will be for the excess bond costs caused by their delay.
Got that right.
And I want everyone to be totally aware that this is a drop in the bucket compared to what the bond costs will be, and that P&M has showed absolutely no concern for customers as far as that goes. And frankly, if they were being responsible, they would have been looking for ways to do an earlier bond issuance in order to save customers these humongous extra costs that are going to come with it. And then my final thing I want to point out is that P&M has not just betrayed customers, but it betrayed all of its allies who helped it pass the ETA and who agreed to the deal based on the idea that it would save customers money and they would get these credits. And P&M just turned their back on all of them.
Right.
It's a breathtaking betrayal. And I want all policymakers to take note of how deep and how cynical this betrayal is, and that they consider that as further policy initiatives are considered in the legislature and in the executive's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fishman. Vice Chair Maestas.
Thank you. I wanted to make it a point, Madam Chair, to also mention, in addition to P&M customers receiving a right and just credit for the closure of those 2 units at the San Juan Generating Station, there's the other issue of the Section 16 community assistance money. Our order is going to make whole the $40 million in community assistance. And as we all remember, that was the pressing issue leading up to, I was not on the commission, but that was the pressing issue leading up to the decision on the financing order, on the financing and abandonment part of this case. And now it seemed to have been relegated to the back as an unimportant issue. And I think we are sending the message that this money has to get to the community, has to get to the appropriate state agencies to begin mitigating the impacts of the closure of the San Juan Generating Station. And I want everybody out there to make sure that that's what this also means. This means helping the community immediately after closure, not 16 or 18 months after the closure of the units. And so I think that's another very important aspect of keeping our order intact. So, and that's why I think the Supreme Court's going to see the reasons behind that, and they're going to understand the urgency in ensuring that that money gets to the community and helps the people that need help the most. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Maestas. And I guess I have another remark based on something that Commissioner Fishman said that reminded me of it. This with respect to the ratepayer, I really appreciate what Commissioner Maestas said about the communities that really need that remedy right away. But also with respect to ratepayers, I was glad that Judy included a footnote in the order that explains a point made by, excuse me, Dr. Blank at New Mexico State, wherein he said, he pointed out that the combination of avoiding the rate credit, avoiding having to pay out the rate credits, and avoiding the timely issuance of the bonds resulted in created a great incentive. Those two factors created a great incentive to continue along that course, and resulted in a 34% return for shareholders, which is, far, far above what is appropriate, and just represents a transfer of wealth from ratepayers to shareholders. And I'm glad that's in the motion, and in our order, that is, and I'm confident that facts like that are inescapable from the attention of the Supreme Court. But it's just one more aspect of how much the public has been abused by P&M and its implementation of the Energy Transition Act, and frankly, how these opportunities have been written into the act. And I think the warning to policymakers, especially the legislature, should be clear that it does no real good to partner with P&M in writing legislation when the language is written so that it can actually come forward and make these types of arguments based on language in the act. So without further ado, I guess we should take a vote. Let's see. Oh, well, let's see. I think that was our discussion, right? We had a motion and a second, correct? So we're, okay, I think we've completed discussion. So let's take a roll call vote on the order. Russell, can you take the roll?
Yes. Yes, Madam Chair. Commissioner Fishman,
Aye.
Commissioner Vicente Aguilar,
Aye.
Commissioner Maestas,
Aye.
Madam Chair,
Aye.
and Commissioner Byrd.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion to adopt Judy's proposed order as revised during the recess passes unanimously.
Thank you. All right, commissioners. Yeah, I can't see a thing without my glasses. So that was item 10.5. We'll move on to item 11 on the agenda. That's discussion items. We have an item on the agenda placed there by Vice Chair Maestas related to statewide transportation electrification and an update of it. Commissioner Maestas, you want to take that away?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. What I thought was in order is that a lot has happened since we approved the 3 transportation electrification plans of each of the 3 IOUs. And as most folks know, the legislature did pass the Transportation Electrification Act, which only applies to the investor-owned utilities. And we know that their collective service areas only represent a small fraction of the state's surface area. So fast forward to the federal infrastructure bill, which is poised to provide about $38 million in transportation electrification infrastructure. And the state DOT has been taking the lead, but we as an agency wanted to make sure that the true statewide effort to deploy transportation electrification infrastructure throughout the state integrates well with the 3 existing transportation electrification plans. So we as an agency, as you know, are fortunate to have not just 1, but 2 Department of Energy Solar Innovator Fellowship Fellows. And in the case of transportation electrification, we have our own Mary Jane Parks, who is kind of the point on transportation electrification. She and my assistant, and I believe other staff, have been attending various climate action teams. In the case of transportation, it's called TCAT. And that has been one of the many forums that the DOT has used to start this dialogue around the state about what transportation electrification infrastructure should look like across the state. And so what we'd like to do, we being myself and Mary Jane Parks, is to provide all of you with a very brief update on what has recently transpired and what we can expect to happen in the near future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Jane Parks. I think she's going to have Hans share her presentation. And Mary Jane, do you want the commissioners to ask you questions as you go through, or just wait till the end?
Whatever they prefer. Either
Okay.
way, either way is fine. Thank you.
All right, Mary Jane,
Thank you,
take it
Madam
away.
Chair and Vice Chair Maestas and Commissioners. I think Patrick is going to share his screen today. So if you have that up there, Patrick. So good afternoon, Madam Chair and Vice Chair Maestas and Commissioners. I'm a researcher for the US DOE working with NMPRC and transportation electrification and community solar. And today I'd like to provide a brief summary of this sector to date as it relates to the recent National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan. And the acronym for that is NEVI. and then what milestones the PRC has accomplished to date. The New Mexico Department of Transportation is preparing to spend about $38 million over the next 5 years. And with this plan in mind, NMPRC is over the short term expected to consider new regulation, load, and power supply issues to meet this the needs of this new sector. So thank you for having me. Next slide, please. Okay, so funding for EV infrastructure, as Commissioner Maestas mentioned, comes from $38 million federal funds, and about $7 million per year for the next 4 years will be spent following some $5 million expenditures in 2021 and 2022. And this program is called the NEVI program, where $5 billion with bipartisan legislation will be granted to the states through a formula program for states to build their infrastructure and plans for EV chargers every 50 miles, with 4 fast DC chargers at each location. And each charger is about 150 kilowatts of power. The state plans are due August 1st, 2022, so just around the corner here. However, New Mexico already submitted their plan. You may have read recently, just in the past few days, New Mexico was the first state in the nation to submit their plan. Next slide, please.
Cool.
Yeah, that was really good for New Mexico. Okay, so here's a summary of some of the NMPRC accomplishments and our pending work. In anticipation of this rollout of the state.
Mary Jane, I think we're one slide ahead of you.
Are you? Oh,
We're on the
I have to
electric
jump back and
utilities.
forth. Okay, Patrick, could you go back one slide? There we go. Perfect. Thank you. In anticipation of the rollout of the state NEVI plan, the NMPRC has accomplished key milestones to support both the plan and its upcoming NOPR for transportation electrification rule. The commission and then Chair Maestas hosted a summit to help stakeholders understand the broad range of topics in transportation electrification, including 4 important elements that regulators could consider in the future. For instance, what should the power sector look like? What about flexibility of utility and grid operations? What data needs will be used to track our progress? And what about advisory services? These would be useful to educate the public and ratepayers. Advisory services could benefit regulators and utilities. Regulators, for example, would determine appropriate new load growth and how it is managed. For example, developing incentives for charging between 2 and 4 a.m. instead of during peak hours. And utilities will be looking at new ways to manage loads for the system-wide benefit. Contributing to the summit, the U.S. Department of Energy's Joint Office of Energy and Transportation spoke to the participants, informing them about DOE's mission to focus on affordable, equitable, reliable, and safe EV infrastructure. The DOE and stakeholders envision a future where everyone can drive electric. So how is this possible, and what are we going to be looking at? These are kind of the issues that came up among our utility and cooperative stakeholders. We also had a presenter, Sandra Begay. She's a researcher with the Sandia Lab and advisor for tribal nations, including Tesuque, Laguna Pueblo, Acoma, and Santa Ana. And she spoke to the group about tribal offices that are installing either L3 fast chargers or slow chargers, depending on the traffic need. Next, the PRC oops, I just went too far away, sorry. So next, the PRC completed some public engagement webinars with New Mexico Department of Transportation and some of their sister agencies. And under the leadership of Jerry Valdez, the NMDOT Executive Director. He describes these state perspectives that helped form the state plan. And they included the need to build out EV charging for state NMDOT facilities, having alternative fuel corridors that will include EV and other clean fuels, the use in all regions of the state of public and private dollars. Considering New Mexico's unique geography and dispersed communities, after all, New Mexico is the 5th largest state in the country geographically. So how do you work with rural and state highways? Something else NMDOT is considering in their plan. They are also looking at how to prioritize equity considerations to plan for access throughout the state. And then future energy capacity constraints. Our utilities feel they'll be able to meet the capacity in the short term, but we'll need long-term planning to supply this growing sector.
Mary Jane,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I wonder, we haven't moved slides since that last
Yeah,
time we talked.
I'm still talking. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I just wanted to make sure I covered some of the issues that were brought up at the summit, because we had 50 to 70 stakeholders at the workshop and the summit, and they captured some wonderful issues, and I just wanted to try and summarize them quickly. And then I'll just mention here on this slide that the pending work at the PRC is we have completed our workshop for a NOPR, and we'd like to have a transportation electrification rule. It's currently in draft stage, but the rule will look at perhaps some common features across the already adjudicated transportation electrification plans that the commission already approved. And so we're expected to complete this rule in the fall of this year. So next slide. Just make sure we're on the same page now. So the state EV infrastructure plan calls for looking at EV charging stations every 50 miles. They have to be located within 1 mile of the off-ramp, and each having 4 DC 150 kilowatt fast chargers. So the Department of Transportation is looking at exceptions to this federal mandate because of our vast geography, and to place stations that fill in the gaps along the key state and rural highways, so where perhaps slow or fewer chargers could be possible for installation based on their needs. The NMDOT plans to work closely with utilities and cooperatives to prepare for the build out of the NEVI plan. And some key takeaways from their utility meetings include EV charging station locations that will be needed where no capacity exists currently. So you can imagine the areas between urban areas in the southern part of the state, and the homeowner wants to drive to Albuquerque. They have to consider the gaps in between that mileage, and perhaps there's no capacity right now. So what do you do about that? So they're working with the IOUs and the cooperatives who need to know the site plans for these new EV charging stations as soon as they're available, so that they can integrate that into their planning and their supply issues. So as we all have discussed previously in other topics, the supply chain issues were expressed from the co-ops and the utilities that will be an issue in the short term for the purchase of transformers and other grid infrastructure. The IOUs are conducting outreach and planning sessions for general capacity planning and their IRPs. So another takeaway is understanding more among the public about utility RPS requirements and how we're going to be using renewables to charge these stations. So utilities will also be looking at the EV charging station traffic patterns and energy use. Data will be collected, for instance, to understand at public charging stations what happens to demand there and what time is the demand occurred. For For example, the NMDOT anticipates greater demand at public charging stations on the highways during afternoon or evenings to accommodate the driving public and tourism. And this is an opposite demand peak, perhaps, to the at-home charging needs, which they envision occurring more on weekends when people are at home from work and able to charge their vehicles more slowly over the weekend time period. So next slide. And this is my last slide, and then we can take questions if you have any. So about the low income considerations and Justice 40, these are initiatives to help install EV charging stations and grant funding in general at the DOE to low income, moderate income communities. So simply installing fast chargers every 50 miles in our state and just doing that formulaic procedure will not meet the needs of low income communities for their access to EV charging. So the NMDOT is committed to applying Justice 40 and equity considerations when they start siting their EV charging stations along rural and state highways, and to allow access for our low-income communities. Charging stations can be sited with exceptions to the federal mandate, for instance, using slower chargers along key rural or state roads that better meet the needs of the local community. So NMDOT will be working closely with cooperatives and IOUs in the coming months and years in the short term on these equity issues to make sure there's charging stations throughout our vast state.
Mary Jane?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Hey, yeah, pardon me.
no problem.
When you're talking about lower speed charging stations, are you talking about making level 2 stations available for more regular charging in a local community? Is that the focus of that?
Yes, level 2 chargers, I believe. They'd be less expensive, and they could operate more with either the cooperative grid in dispersed areas. So yeah, level 2 chargers is something that they're looking at. They'd like the level 3 charger, but if level 2 meets the need, then NMDOT will consider that.
Could any of those chargers be located on thoroughfares other than highways?
Like a state road or?
Local community road where maybe there's sort of a concentration of the rural population so that folks can easily access the station for charging.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Fishman, I believe that is part of the exception that the NMDOT is applying for and working with the federal government on because of our geography and dispersed communities, and then the rural areas. Perhaps there is a local road where it's conveniently located, with a market or a central community center. And if that's the best place to locate a charger, I think this is the kind of input that the DOT was looking for when they were meeting with the public during their public engagement webinars this past spring. So
to the extent that you're involved, certainly I'm totally in support of doing that. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
So that really concludes my presentation, and I would love any questions. And if I can't answer them, because I'm not an expert, but I'm just, yes, sir.
You're on mute, Madam Chair.
Sorry, my dog was making noises.
Anyway, thank you, Mary Jane, for that. Is there any way maybe you can come back, or maybe Jerry Valdez with DOT to make a brief presentation on the statewide plan? Because, I'm a little curious in terms of how far the 38 federal and the 10 state, which is 48 million, how far that can go, even if we did apply that federal requirement every 50 miles. on roadways. I think the priority is on interstate and arterial roads.
Mhm.
So did the plan maybe intimate that that's not going to be enough in terms of just plain coverage? Forget about system limitations, just about placement of this infrastructure.
Well, Jerry is the expert about the plan. I mean, it is NMDOT's plan, and from the PRC perspective, we're trying to be there for the public, and then of course we're doing our own rulemaking, working with the utilities, but we're trying to make sure that these energy considerations are being heard as we go ahead and plan as a state for this infrastructure. I think Jerry has mentioned something like 997 miles, center lane miles, that are in our federal corridors. So as far as I understand it, every 50 miles, yeah, we wouldn't be able to meet that. And that's why they had to go for the exception. There will be some private dollars in our infrastructure here in New Mexico and throughout the country. So I think, yeah, I don't know how they're going to pick and choose. I think the priority that they heard from the public at the webinars was to fill in the gaps. And that was kind of the key phrase, is fill in the gaps between my rural community and Albuquerque or Farmington or Roswell, so that I can get from Albuquerque back home. So they will be looking at ways where they can fill in those gaps.
And I know that there are Tesla charging stations, but they're
Mhm.
they're exclusive charging stations. And so when the state did its plan, I'm sure they just pretty much disregarded counting that as a public, existing charging station because it's Tesla, correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure about, I think that is true. And maybe in the future, Tesla will, I thought I heard that they're going to open up their charging stations, at least in California, to other vehicles. So,
Well, Madam Chair, my hope for the statewide plan in that it's flexible, because I think the IOUs and interveners, they were very loud and clear saying this is a rapidly developing sector, technology growth. I think it's literally impossible to project EV ownership given the price of gas. And I'm sure that if our state ever gets its act together and comes up with a rebate like Michigan and Excel in Colorado, that's certainly going to accelerate the rate of EV ownership. So I think that's the final barrier in this, but certainly this federal money is going to be an incredible stimulus to help really change New Mexico and the way we drive and what we consider as fuel. And so, again, we're going to hear much more about it. I'm anxious to take a look at the statewide plan, and I'm really proud that we are the first state to provide a plan, but much more work needs to be done. And of course, we'll be coming to you with a draft rule fairly soon.
yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Vice Chair Maestas. And I see Commissioner Fishman wants to say something too. So let's hear it.
I just want to say thank you to Commissioner Maestas for continuously bringing up this concept of the rebate for the purchase of an electric vehicle.
Absolutely.
I think it's a critical piece of our policy going forward, and we can't talk about it enough. So thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Fishman, I share that thought. That was exactly what popped into my head too. Rebates are critical. They've been critical for solar, and we know that. We've seen it's been successful, and we absolutely have to have them for vehicles. So I hope we get that message loud and clear out to the legislature. And Commissioner Maestas, were you going to say something else? Okay.
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mary Jane. That was really informative. I really appreciate it. And I would look forward to you coming back with the Department of Transportation as well to hear how they think we can proceed so far with the funding we have so far.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. So let's move on to item number 12, communications with Chief of Staff. Hello, Mr. Prox. How are you?
I'm probably doing better than you are, Madam Chair. You've had quite a long day, but good evening to you and the commissioners. And because you've had a long day, I don't think I have anything that's so burning that I can't wait until next week, but I'm certainly happy to talk about any subjects that commissioners would like to today.
Okay, thank you very much. So I see Commissioner Fishman's champing at the bit. He's got a question. So,
Mr. Moneybags, you have some good news that you should just state more broadly for the public to hear. But I wanted to thank you for the great work you've done in terms of nailing down some significant budget considerations, for the agency going forward that will help us with community solar and other initiatives. So if you'd talk about them for a minute, that'd be great.
Madam Chair and members of the commission and Commissioner Fishman, certainly happy to do that. Appreciate the credits that's been given to me, but a lot of the credit does go to the commission as well, and the vision and what you've asked me to work on. I think we're entering this new fiscal year, FY23. We certainly, I think, are in better shape fiscally than we were perhaps a year or two ago, including about $500,000 in fees to use for the community solar initiative, as you indicated, an overall increase to our operating budget of it's close to 9%. Some supplemental funding both for the last fiscal year, but also that we'll be able to use this fiscal year, and some budget adjustment request authority for this fiscal year as well. Some program transfer authority will just allow us to align our budget a little bit better. But time moves quickly, Madam Chair, and Renata and the division directors have been meeting over the last couple of months, getting our FY24 appropriation request prepared that we will bring to the commission for your approval prior to September 1st. As I've said publicly and privately, I really see this budget initiative as being at least a 2-year cycle. I think we had a first year. But I think we're going to need a little bit more in the second year. And again, we'll be providing some more detail on what we're expecting to ask for the next fiscal year. But overall, I feel pretty good about where we are and with the state's revenue situation. I don't know if anybody had a chance to listen into the Legislative Finance Committee hearing yesterday, and I believe they're down in Silver City. But there's going to be significant additional funding available, both recurring and non-recurring, for the next fiscal year. So I'm hopeful that the legislature and executive will continue to think about the PRC when they're thinking about the important agencies and what's happening in New Mexico and the good work that's happened here over the last year.
Well, that's very interesting. And I do appreciate Steve asking you to just fill us in on that. I'm glad to hear that there's even more money flowing to us, and it doesn't happen without the right kind of good work. So thank you very much for being here with us and wherever else you go that gets your work done. I appreciate it. Let's see. Let's move on to communications with General Counsel.
Madam Chair, we have no communications. We, of course, stand ready to answer questions.
Okay, fine. Thank you. And commissioners, communications with commissioners. Anybody has any news or anything they want to share at 5:30 in the afternoon?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Mayesis.
Commissioner Vicente Aguilar and I attended the NARUC meeting in San Diego. Maybe next week I'll have a little more details about just some of the presentations, but I just had a few announcements that were made by the Center for Public Utilities down at New Mexico State. They have several courses coming up on October 10th through the 14th. One of them is the basics of FERC rate making for the pipeline industry. This is in person only. there's also another course. It's the basics, practical regulatory training in the electric industry. That's a hybrid event. That's also October 10th through the 14th of this year. And then the other one is, it's also a basics course, practical regulatory training for natural gas, local distribution industry. It's a hybrid event. They're all at the Sheraton Uptown, again, October 10th through the 14th, with the FERC rate making for pipeline industry in person only, and the other two are hybrid. Also, Madam Chair, I talked to some colleagues, and I haven't confirmed this, but we were talking about the Solar Innovator Fellowship. And as you know, both of our fellows, their assignments are going to expire late this year. I think Mary Jane's is sometime in November. I think Arthur O'Donnell's is a bit sooner. But I was talking to some colleagues, and they said that there was some money, some federal money, that's been made available, and they're in negotiations with DOE to acquire some fellows. And so perhaps maybe if Wayne can, look into this to see if there are opportunities. We as commissioners may not see the benefit, but I think if we can continue this effort to augment staff and benefit from this great program, the Department of Energy Solar Innovator Program, I think it's all good for the agency. So I'd like to see us, if there's a window of opportunity to compete right now, we should.
Well, Commissioner, Vice Chair Maestas, I totally agree. If we can do that, we absolutely should. So maybe you should visit with Wayne and see what information you can provide for him to start out with.
I may just maybe start informally with our delegation. I mean, as you know, we acquired a second one by approaching Senator Heinrich. So yeah, I can do that, Madam Chair. I didn't think it would turn into an assignment for me, but I'm happy to take it on.
Isn't that what you do? You find the busiest person and give them what you want done.
But you usually do that if they're not present. But
yeah,
in my face works too. I'll get it done.
That's good.
Very courageous, okay. Madam Chair. Very courageous. To his face.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I'm glad to know that. This is really just very good news we heard in the last 3 minutes. It's excellent. All right. So do any other commissioners have any communications they want to share? And hearing none, then we are adjourned. Thanks.
See you guys.
Yeah. Bye.
Take care.